Many years ago, I fought in a great war for a show that helped define my childhood. The show was Digimon, and the Great War was whether Sora should have ended up with Tai or with Matt. It was a bloody conflict fought on all terrains, land, air, and sea. Brother would fight brother, friend would take on friend. The number of casualties on each side were gargantuan. Many brave, intelligent souls were lost. It was a bitter argument that lasted long after the show was over, and especially now that Digimon Tri is out, it's like a call to arms for the veterans to grab their rifles and head for the trenches. I was on the losing side of that war, although I still maintain that it was not the wrong side. But that defeat did teach me a very important lesson very early on in my life. And that is that if you're going to ship a pairing in a show, and you're going into it with the expectation that it's going to be canon, 9 times out of 10 you are going to be bitterly disappointed. Since that time with Digimon, I've never been a huge shipper. There are pairings that I enjoy, but I don't go into them expecting canon. I just like viewing the art, reading the fics, and seeing the characters interact in the show, as much or as little as it is. But I never again entered the fray of a shipper's war because I saw the futility of it. Shipping shouldn't be about fighting, it should be just about enjoying yourself. RWBY's going through its own ship war right now between Bumblebee and Black Sun, with avid defenders on each side. Personally, I can't say I have a real preference. The fact is that the character relationships and their interactions with each other are so wildly inconsistent that there's no real point to ship within the show itself. It's one of those situations where you're better off just reading the fanfiction if you want a good representation for your ship. But it's led to much fighting, and at this point I don't know what's more annoying, the people bitching about shipping or the people bitching about the people bitching about shipping. Seriously, it's like y'all have never seen a fucking ship war before. Back in my day, we charged the fields of battle like in Braveheart. Nowadays, people just harass each other on social media, which is a lot less fulfilling and just leads to a lot of headaches. But seriously, y'all need to relax. You don't need to send hate mail or barbarically wave around decapitated heads of your enemies or make terrible videos about the state of a fandom. If you enjoy a ship, then enjoy it. If you're getting into a fight over a ship, really stop and think about what it is you're fighting about. Because if it's just because you want your ship to be canon, I guarantee you it's not as worth the fight as you think it is. And if you're someone who's just complaining about everybody complaining about shipping, close the fucking browser and go do something else for an hour. Seriously, I do it all the time. It's remarkably easy to ignore this stuff. On a relevant note, when I'm saying take it easy, what I'm not saying is that you shouldn't be fighting for LGBT equality. This isn't so much of a shipping thing as it is a people thing, because what people don't seem to realize when they voice against having LGBT characters is that LGBT and POC and every other term you want to use are not special things that are thrown in to make a statement they're people. The point of media, whether you acknowledge it or not, is to portray people and the times and struggles they go through at the time the piece was made. There are entire dissertations about how horror movies from the 70s and 80s were a think piece on sexuality, gender, and race issues going on at that time. Hell, do you know how big of a thing it was back in the day that Night of the Living Dead had a lead character that was black? Romero was on record as saying it was because Dwayne Jones had the best audition, but the significance of it still stands. You can have an LGBT character and have it not be a big deal. The characters in Night of the Living Dead never made a scene out of the leader being a different race, but you could clearly see he was. The problem here in RWBY is not that they're not showing attention to it, is that they're just not showing it at all. Night of the Living Dead was show don't tell on the race issue, but RWBY doesn't show or tell. Was this supposed to be it? What about this? Are a few winks supposed to be all there is for representation? What people don't realize is that LGBT's representation, especially in the last year or so, mostly results in either no representation or one or both of the parties end up getting killed off. It's a recurring issue in television. LGBT people are tired and fed up with it, and I don't think it's that irrational of them to be angry about it. No one's really gonna get angry about a straight white dude getting killed off, because straight white dudes are a dime a dozen in Hollywood. Most shows or movies only get one gay character. That's another thing. Why does it only have to be one? Hell, in my group of friends, half of them at least identify as bi, and that counts as far as LGBT goes. For some reason, people have this preconceived notion that LGBT characters only exist because they think they have to be pandering or have an agenda. There are web series out there that show that having LGBT relationships can be as natural and regular as a straight pairing, which is exactly how it should be. LGBT people aren't aliens with special powers, they're people. If RT insists there is an LGBT character in there already, then they need to stop playing coy and just show who it is. That won't change who the character is. A well-written character isn't defined by their sexuality. Wait, shit, RWBY isn't well-written. Damn it. Okay, well, just fire the writers you have and then get a writer who actually knows what they're doing. Like, on the one hand, I get wanting to be careful. The idea of writing representation badly is fucking terrifying. But if you're really that convinced that it's something over your head, then you work yourself up to that. Like, especially for an animation series, you make it definitively clear this exists in the world. You don't just keep not writing it at all. I get that people are afraid of backlash from a very vocal part of the community, but you have to, as soon as possible, see that it's shitty to argue against representation just on the grounds of a select few being out of control. I guess to end this off, don't freak out with shipping. Representation is worth fighting for, and if you're just someone who's bitching about this entire thing but has no real stake in the argument, just shut the fuck up, because you honestly annoy me worse than the others. Okay, well, that one's out of the way. Now let's get into the final episode, and...
I've got good news. You see, there's no need to wonder where your god is, because he's right here! And he's fresh out of mercy.
So here we are, the final fight of the volume, and it's essentially the same fight as the one at the beginning of the volume. Yeah, the monster's different, but the beats it hits are pretty similar. And the monster, the Knucklelavy? Oh god, that does not roll off the tongue well. As terrifying as it is to look at, it fights like a total bitch. It just stands there and uses spaghetti arms attack. Yeah, he fights with spaghetti arms. We're really meant to take this seriously. What the hell was that about? Was this one more way of putting more emphasis on Jaune when you don't need to? Like he's supposed to be the one to take care of everyone? Because that's a good idea. How I wouldn't trust him to take care of a ficus. But at long last, we see Jaune's weapon has gotten an upgrade. Finally, something to give it a better edge in combat than is just a simple sword. And it's a bigger sword. Well, of course. I mean, what else would you expect other than a giant, jagged broadsword? You know what? What do you want? You probably want a claymore that can turn into a rocket launcher. You think they're made of money here at RT Animation? God. Actually, I don't even see how this would be an upgrade. There's no blade on the sword now. It's encased in its sheath. It'd basically be like hitting them with a large club.
Stop looking!
Was that really necessary? Ending the volume off with one more slap. Man, the season really has been rather slap heavy, hasn't it? So the plan is to hold down the arms, bash the horse's head in, and then kill the main body, which on the one hand is a really effective strategy, taking advantage of its rather stupid anatomy to defeat it. But like, watch how easy this is. Like, this is the final battle for the volume. You've been building this thing up since at least episode 6. It's resisted just about everything you've thrown at it, and yet this tiny little knife that you've apparently been keeping on you this whole time, and we never knew, is strong enough to just rip it apart? What is it made out of, Valyrian steel? Why is this one little knife decapitating an eldritch abomination when a sword, a scythe, and 2 handgun knives couldn't do that job? And all of those have seen far more combat than this thing. And yeah, that's the end of the Knucklelavy. Really underwhelming final fight. Oh, I think Demon Harambe put up more of a fight.
How did you find us out here?
You know, it was the damnedest thing. We were out on foot patrol, and we found this map out by an abandoned village that showed a route going through here, so we got on our airships, and we followed it, and found you. Crazy, right? And we get the ending monologue, which would be really good if it didn't feel like they were ripping off Sam's speech from Two Towers. I love that they do this whole montage bit to try and show how far we've come this volume, when the reality of the situation is that absolutely nothing has happened this volume. Weiss was trapped with her family when she could have left at any time. Yang went from post-traumatic stress disorder to armed and ready at the snap of the fingers. Blake did nothing at all. And Ruby and friends wandered a continent and fought a couple Grimm. And we introduced the plot of the show, which was barely mentioned before now, and has been mentioned at all since this reveal. The best thing I can say about this scene is that the orchestral score is pretty. The way it incorporates Boop, Home, This Life Is Mine, From Shadows, and especially Cold. The orchestral scores for each volume just keep getting better and better.
This is what
Wait, there are trains? You mean they could have just taken the fucking train? Well, why the fuck did we walk all this time? Like, do you have any idea how much it costs to upgrade your weapons and armor and it didn't occur to them to save up for a goddamn rail card? Ah, Tom, you ignorant slut. How quickly you forget. They explain all this in the world of Remnant. How the Grimm attack any train routes and how bandits and Grimm attack all settlements. Therefore, the rail system is only within the Mistral borders, not all of Anima. Just watch the world of Remnants. Okay. Let's break this down, shall we? First of all, I need to point out that, aside from the ones in the Four Kingdoms, none of the Volume 4 World of Remnants have been uploaded to YouTube. They're all on the Rooster Teeth site. They're not first only, meaning you can watch them on there, but but I know for a fact that there's a large quantity of the fans who wait for the episodes on YouTube. So that's a faction of the follower base that has probably not seen it, and I don't consider that's their fault. Because why the fuck would you not upload the World of Remnants to YouTube? You could say that it's to get traffic to the site, but do you really think people are going to go out of their way for cliff notes that either don't make sense or contradict things already established in the show? Secondly, the continent of Anima, no one else is on this continent. It isn't like Vale and Vacuo having a share. Mistral is the sole proprietor of Anima. Therefore, by right, all of this is Mistral's territory. And the king is responsible for all of this, including the villages living outside of Mistral. Because in a realm ruled by a king, which is what a fucking kingdom is, the villages are still under the rule of the governing monarch in the land. This is how a kingdom works, people. This isn't some mystery you have to scour a library for. This is something you can learn just by playing Where in Fucking Time is Carmen Sandiego. But again, World of Remnant, the king of Mistral used the outlying towns as cannon fodder for the Grimm. But, I retort, this was before the Great War, a war that Mistral lost, and one would assume that given Vale was against this process and they won the war, one of the conditions is that they shouldn't be allowed to do that anymore. Because in any other world, in any other environment, using civilians as a meat shield is considered a fucking war crime. Like, I know Attack on Titan had those outlying towns to serve as focal points for gathering titans, but at least they were protected by 50-meter stone walls, and the only reason those failed was because a titan the size of the goddamn Chrysler building kicked a giant hole through it. And hell, even they acknowledged that having those outlier towns was fucked up. I think, they said, I'm pretty sure it came up at some point. I don't know. It's been a while. My point is, if this all falls under the realm of Mistral, that means it should all be protected, meaning there should be some reliable way to get transportation out to all settlements. And also, consider this. Mistral has a trade route that presumably sees goods come in off the ports. You mean to tell me they don't have a reliable way of getting those supplies off the port into the kingdom? They don't have some Spectre gunships or AC-130s to act as air support while vital supplies that could be critical to maintain an average way of life get transported where they need to be? The setup here is so inconsistent. Why would anybody want to live outside of the main kingdoms?
Well, that life isn't meant for everyone.
Fuck you, Crow. There are giant fucking scorpions out here. Why would anyone want to live where the giant fucking scorpions are? I mean, you have villages like Xiao and the Yuri villages that have been completely wiped out, but then we have ones like the one in the first episode in Higanbana, and they're fine. No problem. So what is the ratio here? I mean, the village in the first episode didn't have reliable defenses, otherwise they wouldn't have needed to employ these 4 first years to save them from the Geist. It boils down to this. Either the Grimm can't be that big of a deal if these villages are allowed to live outside of the borders of the kingdom in complete peace and harmony, or everyone on Anima should be fucking dead. Now, going with what I said last part, this is the only other instance of any sort of focus on Ruby as a character. And I don't know about you, but I don't walk away from this feeling like Ruby grew as a character. Like, there's this whole big monologue about how the world is dark, but she has to keep going anyway, and that goodness will conquer as long as they stay strong. And, like, yeah, this would be a great character moment. I wish it had been present all goddamn volume. And boy howdy, Crow sure bounced back quick from being fatally poisoned by man's scorpion venom, although, as I already established, scorpion venom isn't really lethal to healthy human. You know what? Fuck it. Volume's over. You know what's weird? We've seen a lot of Tyrion in this volume, and we've even seen a little bit of Hazel, but we haven't seen or heard from Dr. Chucklefuck since the first
Why, thank you, Professor. Salem always did say you were quite hospitable.
Yup, there he is. Called it! And now the final scene. It's Oscar meeting Crow in a bar. And Crow somehow knows Ozpin's in him, which, given all the things Crow has been privileged to know in the show, I don't know why that's supposed to be of any surprise. And yeah, that's Volume 4, all wrapped up. There are some miscellaneous things I'm going to add in to wrap this sucker up, but let's begin with this. For starters, Volume 4 is not the worst thing RT has ever put out, nor is it the worst thing I've ever seen. It was entertaining at times, and Blake's parents were okay despite the massive retcon they present. Yang's PTSD arc was set up really well. It's just a shame that nothing was really done with it. And I'm really bummed that nothing was ever made out of that whole split personality thing they were hinting at in the opening. All the different ways they could have taken that were just insane. And in terms of plot importance and weight attached to it, I would honestly say the Crow-Tyrion fight is probably the best fight in the entire series so far, at least the best one-on-one. That being said, I think Volume 4 overall was a giant clusterfuck. The rushed, hastily put together mess that Volume 3 was seems to have carried over into this current volume, which tells me that RT didn't learn its lesson. Everything about this volume felt like it wasn't planned out properly or had to be executed at the last minute, or that there was no proper communication between director and animators. And where that is really apparent is in the director's commentary for Volume 4. Allow me to read a few excerpts. Carrie talks about how each episode had a fuck you shot, which is a particular shot that was difficult to create across all departments. The opening shot of the volume was one of these. Or, just the entire volume. Regarding Oscar and his story this volume, Miles and Carrie had more rewrites with him than with anything else in RWBY, trying to figure out the right way to present it. At one point, Oscar's first major scene was going to be in Chapter 7 instead of 4. Here's an idea. Don't fucking have him in this volume. I'll get to that later. Mentioned in the commentary, but in more detail in the special features, is the fact that RWBY had a rough start to the volume due to the new production pipeline, which continued for several episodes. Is that why we had World of Remnants thrown in haphazardly that completely fucked up the flow of the volume? Ever wonder if anyone over at RT Animation has ever heard of pre-production? On that note, they talk about how incredibly different the original 4 episodes of Volume 1 were compared to what we got, and that Fennec and Corsac were originally Volume 1 villains. Okay, how? Why? What would their roles have been? I'm just having a hard time picturing this. In regards to the infamous map, Carrie mentions that in one version of the script, Orange was going to lose the map in a fight of some sort. A similar was also supposed to happen in Chapter 6 involving Tyrion, but decided against it because of how busy RWBY already was.
Fuck you!
On the topic of writing RWBY with multiple different storylines at the same time, Miles called it a scary experiment, but is happy overall with how it turned out. The timeline is a mess and half of the storylines were underdeveloped as fuck, but sure, I guess we can be happy with how this turned out. Why not? Carrie talking about the change from Poser to Maya and all the new stuff it allows them to do now, but he also talks about how they also changed to something called Pencil, a plugin that they wanted to use for years to help with the look and style of the show. They initially tried to emulate it using Maya, which is what we saw from the Volume 4 character short RTX, but realized it would be much easier for the technical crew if they just used the original tool, so they changed midway through production. Again, pre-production. This is how you figure shit out before you make the final goddamn product. Miles talks about how they tried to have Salem feel a bit motherly and not overly cruel because she's better than that and that she has a certain way of talking to each of her lieutenants. Wow, I don't think you could have failed harder at that. I mean, did you see those scenes in episodes 3 and 11?
I am going to ask you this one more time, and I expect a clear answer. No! I want to hear you say it. I thought you were the girl that wanted power. Did you lie to me?
You call that motherly? Miles, I've met your mother. We shared a lunch table at RTX. She's a lovely woman. I don't think she's the basis for Salem. Originally, the inn and the pub were the same building, but were separated when they couldn't figure out how to fit Raven into the scene. She's upstairs, they're not. Problem solved. Crow sees them through the crowd and then goes upstairs to meet her. In the charity scene, Cohen says there are about 100 different unique people in the room, each with different clothing. You had time to animate all that, but you couldn't animate them destroying a map. No, I'm sorry, I'm never letting the map thing go. The original plan with Ozpin was to not reveal him as anything having to do with Oscar until the very end of the volume. Why didn't you do that? That would have worked so much fucking better. Again, I'll get to that later. Miles says the whole campfire scene was probably the most difficult thing in the volume to write, simply due to how much they needed to cover. Also, Carrie says more people worked on this scene than any other in the volume. So much you needed to cover. Really. Half of it was shit we already knew, the other half was stuff you could have foreshadowed long before this. Bravo, you suck. In the scene with Nora being bullied, Miles jokes about how if you feel really bad about it, those other kids likely died the next day. To follow that up, Carrie then mentions that they actually considered to have one of those kids lying face down on the ground in the background during the attack. Y'all are some cold motherfuckers. According to Carrie, Jaune and Ruby's moment was originally going to end with them hugging, but was cut due to time and Carrie not wanting people to worry. Not to worry? Dude, you're gonna do it eventually. I've seen this trap way too many times. It's inevitable. Who do you think you're trying to fool? One of the ideas they had that they didn't make into the episode involved Ren's father going to see the mayor. Since he's a hunter and he had just returned from a hunt, Lai was going to talk to the mayor about how they didn't find any animals and was almost as if they had been spooked away, and that they should get a huntsman to come and investigate. On the one hand, that is something you should have shown, but unless Ren came to that meeting, and I don't know why you'd take a kid to that, I don't see how that would have worked. I mean, Ren can't really flashback to something he didn't himself witness. When talking about the fight, it's mentioned that there were several different versions of it. They don't go into detail, but Carrie does mention that Crow was originally supposed to do something, but Miles reminds him it's something they can't talk about. What does that even mean? They were going to originally animate a better fight than what they gave us? Which seems to be the recurring theme to every volume finale so far? And the fan favorite one, Miles was the one who wrote the majority of Blake's scenes in Volume 4. When she's slapping Sun, Miles only intended to be softer slaps on the shoulder, so he was quite surprised by the end result. How do you fuck that up? That's called directing. You use your words. You oversee the project. You check it. You offer your input. That's what a director does. I mean, how do you not realize this before you hit render? Jesus Christ. These examples, they may not seem like much if you're someone who doesn't really look at the intricacies of production, but in any production, lack of clear communication is a problem. Josh Trank shut down on the set of the Fantastic Four remake and the entire film tanked. And this volume showed the biggest example of no communication between the directors and animators, between the crew and the audience, and between the writers and what they think they're writing. I mean, the plot management of Volume 4 is just terrible. The only storylines that felt like they were given any sort of proper attention or paced out evenly were Team Orange and Blake, for better or for worse. And Weiss, Yang, and even the main villains had their storylines sliced in half in order to make room for a sixth storyline about some bastard farm kid no one gave a shit about. And to what end? So that Alphonse Elric could get some more work? Whoop-de-fucking-do. If you really wanted to allocate your resources in a way that you can actually make a quality show, maybe stop blowing your load on swallowing Funimation's load and hiring half their voice talent that you don't need, and instead put that money into fight choreographers, writers, equipment, etc., and get the episodes to a length where you can actually have a good amount of time to tell a story without wasting it. Seriously, it's like the only effort put into this anymore is the voice cast, which didn't need to be the thing that needed the upgrade. If I wanted to watch something with Funimation actors in it, you know what I'd do? I'd go watch a fucking Funimation show. RWBY's voice acting was never amazing, but it was decent enough and it never made me want to tune out. Having actors like Vic and Liz Maxwell were special treats, but it isn't a special treat when it's the new norm. You don't need Chris Sabat, you don't need Josh Greeley, you don't need J. Michael Tatum, you need Sharmie Lay. I mean, I adore Sharmie, but come on, Sword Art Online, that awful fucking Shane Dawson movie, and now she's in this? Why is she cursed? She's good talent, people. She doesn't deserve this level of abuse. But going back to the effort thing, what exactly is RWBY's calling card even supposed to be anymore? It was originally advertised as a fighting anime, but can it really be called that anymore? Now, I know it will never be Monty level ever again, and that they're making do with what they have to still keep the action at a respectable quality, but when your season has 5 main fight scenes and only one of them is actually any semblance of good, that's not exactly going to earn you a ringing endorsement, you know? Like, this one is okay, but the long pauses and gaps in between really takes me out of it. These two are mediocre at best, and this one's just fucking awful. Again, I know it will never be Monty level, but there's some really good fight choreography in anime. Just look at one of Hosoda's films. Find someone who knows how to make combat make sense and at the very least make it exciting again. And I know I made the comparison in part 2, but it really does feel like they used Advent Children as a huge inspiration for this volume. I mean, stop me if any of this sounds familiar. Combat where the protagonists fly around and use flashy moves while fighting giant monsters, plot points that come out of nowhere and don't make any sense within established continuity. The main protagonist is an emo blonde who wields a giant sword that's a combination of a couple different sword parts and who mourns the loss of a loved one. The primary antagonist is an edgelord who is trying to please his mother figure. This is goddamn fucking Advent Children! Holy shit! How has nobody else called them on this? Remember in my Volume 1 video when I said that it wasn't like they were going to pull a Marble Hornets and completely shit the bed 3 years in? Yeah, guys, that was a joke. You weren't supposed to actually do that. Like, God, looking at the show now, you can barely recognize what it's become. The first 2 volumes weren't amazing, but at least with both, it felt like we were on the same page. They were setting up the White Fang and the Grim Invasion. It was simple enough, and I understood the reason behind at least the White Fang's part. And now look at it. There's magic everywhere. There are gods, relics that are apparently important, but we didn't know that or have any indication of that before. Hell, the entire premise of the show from the trailers isn't even right anymore. We were told it was 4 girls kicking monsters' ass. Yet 3 of them spent the volume doing practically nothing, and RWBY's major contribution to this volume was getting drop-kicked in the ovaries by the poor man's Kimberly, and then just being nothing but an inconvenience to her uncle when he steps in to try and save her. Which I don't blame her so much as to how the writing just made her out to be completely useless and cumbersome. She's the lead fucking character, and yet she's the one who feels the most dead weight of the 4 characters of Team Orange. And this leads me to a bigger point. RWBY hasn't changed as a character in 4 volumes. I mentioned this before, of course, but it really needs to be reiterated. Yang has her mom issues, Blake has the White Fang, Weiss has her family legacy, and those 3 are the character stories. They have their own stories and their own paths. RWBY is the plot character, meaning she's the one that's pushing the story forward and who the main story revolves around, but at the cost of her having any definitive character arcs. The ending of Volume 3 should have had a serious effect on her as a character. It didn't. She regressed, but that doesn't feel so much as a character change so much as the writers just writing her as meek because the plot demanded it. Which seems to be par for the course for writing Ruby Rose. Her effectiveness flips depending on what the plot demands. They say she's absolutely terrible without her weapon, and yet we've seen her dropkick Grimm like they were made out of paper. The trip to Mistral should have been her journey, and yet Jaune and hell even Ren are taking more of a role than she is. Like, is she supposed to be strong for the team? Is she supposed to be depressed? Tired? What exactly are you doing with her? And why does it feel like this journey is more about Jaune and Ren and even Crow than it is about RWBY? And since I'm on a tangent, can we talk about the gender discrepancy here? Because the first 3 volumes actually did a pretty decent job at introducing a healthy balance of men and women per volume. Even the clusterfuck of Volume 3's tournament, men and women characters were pretty much on an even scale in terms of how many were introduced. And now this volume, for men, we've got Oscar, Jacques, Whitley, Klein, Gira, Fennec, Corsac, Tyrion, Chucklefuck, Hazel, Ren's dad, the ship's captain. And now for women, we've got Callie, Ren's mom, Ilya, the first mate lady, that waitress, she was a character. Yeah, you see the difference here? And it seeps into the stories for the girls. Yang's story revolves almost exclusively around her relationship with her dad, Weiss with her dad, brother, and butler, Blake from her dad and son, RWBY with her uncle, and to a lesser extent with Jaune. Pyrrha's death so far has served no purpose but to give Jaune something to angst about. We still don't really know anything about Nora's history from before Ren entered the picture. Now you're just reaching, you might say. Maybe, I retort, and maybe it's par for the course with media, and I'm not even saying it's necessarily a bad thing that it does this, considering that it's at least not all romantic. Mostly. But this volume, more than the last 3, seem to reflect more on the girls' relationship with the men in their lives, whether it acknowledges it or not. In one of the AfterBuzz videos, Miles went on a bit about writing character arcs and how Jaune's arc in Volume 1 was ill-received.
The things that we wanted to try and do was to show that this wasn't going to be a show that focused solely on Ruby Rose as a character. We wanted to have an ensemble cast. We really wanted everybody to enjoy all of the characters.
The problem is you haven't done that. 4 years in, and Jaune still feels like the most developed character. For as serious storylines as Blake and Weiss have with the White Fang and the Schnee legacy, you'd think they'd be more well-developed as characters. But Weiss's personality has been through the ringer, and Blake's was essentially retconned to make her now the daughter of the wealthiest faunus family in the world. Yang's only gets brought up when it's convenient, and RWBY, well, I already went on about that. And these are the main girls. In the very first volume, you spent a quarter of the season devoted to an arc for Jaune before you even given proper attention to your main girls. That's why people were angry. Not that you gave another character an arc, that you gave him an arc before you even fully fleshed out the 4 main characters. That, and the arc wasn't particularly good and amounted to nothing more than a bullying subplot, but I digress. There's a long-standing rumor that the reason they don't like to write character arcs is because of how poorly Jaune's arc was received. If the lesson you took from Jaune's arc not being well received, that you shouldn't write character arcs, you took the wrong goddamn lesson away from that. Now, in an effort to try and clean this volume up, here is how I would restructure and reorganize it. Now, this is not a complete rewrite. This doesn't get rid of the major plot problems like relics or maidens. This is just a basic reformatting and shifting of priorities that I feel would give the volume better flow in keeping with writing multiple storylines happening all at once. We're keeping the idea for this volume the same, but straightening it out a bit. First off, Oscar. I would limit his appearance to just the finale stinger. Think about it. What does this scene do? It establishes a new character to an existing one. It gives us a mystery to figure out. Is Ozpin really inside this little boy's head? And then it gives us the entire off-season to mull it over. And then what I'd do is I'd take the rest of his scenes from this volume, add some more scenes to bridge the gaps, and then I would make that the first episode of Volume 5. How much better is that already? Oscar scenes did nothing this volume but pad out time. This isn't information we need to know right now. This had nothing to do with anything else that was going on this volume. It doesn't need to be here. Second, Cinder. After thinking long and hard about it, I decided I'd keep in her scenes with the exception of the appearance in episode 3 because there's no need for it. Here's all that scene does. It reinforces the idea that Ozpin might still be alive, which was already pretty firmly established at the end of Volume 3. They introduced the relic plot, but the Crow and Raven encounter ultimately did a better job of setting that up. If you could call this doing a better job. They tell us that they maintain control at Beacon, which is almost immediately contradicted at the beginning of the next episode. There's just no reason for this scene to exist, so you might as well just cut it. The rest you can make an argument for, but I have trouble trying to figure out if they should stay or not, because they don't really relate to the rest of the season, but you need something to show that, hey, the villains are still here. Cinder scenes are admittedly the ones I have the most trouble trying to figure out how to place. Admittedly, you can also have the episode 11 appearance that go in Volume 5, but then Cinder's appearance in the monologue at the end doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and you do kind of need it, because it's a monologue showing all the characters at the end. So with those two time wasters either reduced or removed entirely, let's work on the RWBY girls since we now have some more time to work with. Now first off, I would structure it so that each girl has at least a little time in each episode. With Oscar and Cinder out of the way, this buys us some time in episodes 4, 7, 10, and 11, but for the rest it would require a time length extension. which each episode should be about the length of a regular anime episode anyway, save for the budgetary bullshit they keep spouting. Yang would devote more time to her relationship with her dad before putting on the arm, and also show more how having only one arm would hinder her day-to-day, because the scenes in episode 3 didn't showcase a lot of that. The only scene that showed it was a hindrance is that her dropping the plate. I would also maybe like to see some arguments between Yang and Taiyang as he tries to find ways to help her through her depression and her just not wanting to talk about it. Basically just add scenes to bridge the gaps in between the scenes we get. The kitchen scene and her putting on the arm could happen around the halfway mark of the season instead of the first third. And then after that would be some more training and finally her feeling ready enough to leave, if that even should happen this volume, or just leave it for the beginning of next volume. Blake's story, I would more or less keep it the same, it works fine as it is. The biggest difference is that I would get rid of Sun because you don't need him and the writing works just fine without him. Blake could handle the dragon on her own with the help of the ship crew. You could even use that as an example of how proficient she's become with her clones. Sun being gone would also allow for more time between Blake and her parents to help talk about their issues. Hell, they should be the ones to tell her she's better off fighting with her friends, not Sun. The Ilya encounter can easily be rewritten to be a one-on-one. That's not hard at all, it just requires more effort on the choreography for Blake and Ilya. Blake's arc should have been about her and her parents, no monkeying around with Sun's bullshit. Weiss would focus more on her relationship with her family, maybe show a family dinner or something. Show the mother, because where the fuck has she been this whole volume? She's been drinking in that garden an awful long time. But like, more interactions with Whitley, more interactions with Klein, show what life in her household was like. Because again, Weiss felt like someone cut her storyline in half. Maybe Klein could help Weiss with her singing. Maybe Whitley could attempt to have a bonding moment that still gives some hints of him being evil. Give us a reason to believe Jacques could have actually manipulated her, maybe even gaslighted her as a child instead of just being a straight up evil cocksucker. Show more of the family dynamic and how she feels about it. I guess that's another big thing wrong with this line is that it lacked any feeling behind it. You did it because you needed a storyline for Weiss, not because you actually cared about it. And finally, Team Orange. How much would I change their plotline? Well, in an ideal world, I'd just put them on a fucking train, skip all the country traveling bullshit. The problem with Team Orange is that they're both the easiest and hardest to rewrite because everything about their arc depends on the four of them being complete fucking idiots. The fact that they were sent forward without knowing anything about their objective by the guy who knows everything about their objective is incredibly counterproductive. At the very least, they should already know about the maidens, otherwise what the fuck was the end of Volume 3 for? Okay, so for Orange's storyline, they try to take the train from the docks, but the guy shows up and breaks the rails, forcing them to go on foot. Next, horses. Give them horses. It's more efficient, it's practical, it makes sense given what they're doing, and let's be honest, a storyline with Ruby interacting with her horse would be the best thing to come out of this volume. Have their supplies be on the horses, and during the Tyrion fight, the horses get scared and run away, and the map and supplies end up getting lost. This could give a better reason for Jaune to completely lose hope. When Ruby's about to be stabbed, Ren tries to shoot Tyrion, but is out of ammo, and the horses have the dust supplies, thus why he can't do anything. Jaune jumps in front of Ruby like Sol over Maka, and Tyrion goes to stab through both of them when Crow arrives. The Crow and Tyrion battle would probably have a more direct contact since a lot of their fighting is countering and parrying, although considering the fight is pretty good on its own, it's not entirely necessary. Then Crow gets poisoned, and then the campfire, since in an ideal world they already know about the maidens, we can just skip ahead to them talking about Pyrrha and go from there. Ren and Nora splitting off doesn't really help, since they already know the Knuckle of V is out and about, and they're essentially leaving the three to their deaths, so I'd keep them together to go through Kura Yuri. Then the fight plays out, and since they have no ammo left, they have to rely solely on blades and their own physical capabilities to win. Ships see the smoke, and we go to Mistral. And that's more or less how I would do it. Most of all, I would just shift focus more towards Ruby and make her feel more like a character again than a plot device. Ruby's had no on-screen time to mourn compared to Jaune, and that's not a good thing. I know people like to remind us about how Ruby having a limited budget and not having the proper resources to make the show this way as a way to assuage the angry fans, but that's not a valid excuse anymore. In Volume 1, you could let that slide, but now? It's been 4 years and we're still blaming budget for the reason the screenplay is terrible? 4 years and they still haven't learned how to balance a checkbook? When Werner Herzog was asked how much it took to finance a screenplay, his response was a week and $1.50 for 100 sheets of paper. The story costs nothing to write, so why can't the writing actually be good unless they really just can't do it? People keep saying that we need to be patient, to give it time, but like, how much time do you need? It's been 4 years and barely anything has happened. Fans like to spout the fact that there are 10 to 20 seasons of the show planned out, so patience is required. You do know that's not considered a good thing, right? Being patient for almost a quarter of the average human lifespan in hopes that something may happen later on down the line? Say what you will about the way Lost was handled, at least shit happened. Season 2 is my least favorite season of the show, but you need to watch Season 2 in order to understand the rest of the series. RWBY, you can skip Volume 2 entirely and you miss little to nothing. It's not the same thing. When I said in the first 2 volumes that I was okay with it going slow, it's because I too was suckered into the idea of them world building and expanding upon their setting and their characters before going too balls out. They were taking their time and giving it the love and care it deserved to really be something great. The stuff they were setting up had me interested, and I was really excited to see what happened. But the problem is that none of that really went anywhere. Almost everything they were setting up in the first 2 volumes was either dropped for other storylines or changed to be something completely different than what was initially portrayed as. And none of it really amounted to anything. Remember when Vale's entire dust supply being stolen was an important plot point? Remember when Penny was going to be a character vital to the plot? Remember when this guy wrote a good season of a show? Yeah, it turns out that guy wouldn't know good writing if it mugged him in broad daylight and stole his fucking wallet. Now we're talking about a guy who watched an anime with incredible character depth, fantastic fight scenes, and an interesting and deep perspective of conflicting morals that comes with being saviors of the world, and walked away from it only talking about a cat girl sticking her ass out. Monty was not a perfect human being. He had a great idea, but he wasn't good in the details, and that was shown 4 volumes in with how much shit has been thrown in haphazardly. I don't know what the original plan was, but I highly doubt it's still being followed. I would love to see the show Bible just to see how much of a fucking mess this is, but it's locked behind no spoiler questions and the vaguest of bullshit hints. This is not how you go about things. You have to actually give viewers some clues as to what will happen, not just drop it all on them like dropping a fucking glossary down laps out of nowhere. You have to actually make an effort with writing. Things like timelines not lining up, character motivations not making sense, vital plot points that come out of nowhere, all that stuff can be fixed so easily. It just requires you to actually care enough to better yourselves and try. RWBY isn't good, but it could have been great. All it needed was a steady hand and someone who knew how to craft a good story in an interesting world. At this point, I have no faith in any of the writers to do that. People have been growing hope with the new writer they brought on for RWBY Chibi, but if I can't tell the difference between his writing and Miles', which, by the way, I can't, then what's the point? At this stage, outside of a complete reboot with a better team, I'm struggling to find a way that can still salvage things other than maybe take a year off to just figure things out. Volume 3 should have come out later and gave you guys time to really get things in order. If you took time off to really buckle down, straighten yourselves out, and really figure out what the story is and how it should be told, you might be able to save this. Remember, a lot of RWBY fans overlap with anime and gaming fans, and if nothing else, those fuckers know how to wait for shit. They'll piss and moan at you, sure, but if they can wait 3 years for Season 2 of Attack on Goddamn Titan, then they can wait a year for you to get your shit together. You know, it's funny, while working on this volume's review, I went back and rewatched the first 3 volumes to see if anything changed for me. Volume 3 remained more or less the same. I didn't really like it then, I don't particularly care for it now. Volume 2, I still enjoy the first half, but from episode 7 on, I find I don't like it as much as I once did. But Volume 1 was the biggest surprise because even after everything that's happened, I still felt excited watching it. Even knowing what happens, I still got that feeling of glee at watching it and thinking, oh, you beautiful bastard, oh, the places you'll go. I want to feel excited watching RWBY again. I want to get back to that point where I'm optimistic about the road going forward and not constantly dismayed at all the poor choices. RWBY isn't good, but it could be great. Stop with the self-deprecation, get your shit together, read some better fucking writing material that give you an idea of how a story should be written, and get a better fucking show going. If Monty were alive today to see all of this, it's hard to tell if he would approve of it all or if he would just jump right back into his fucking grave. Oh, he'd be cool with it, relax. Losers. In summation, well, what else can I really say? Volume 4 is a disaster on just about every major level. For any good thing I can say about it, there are 10 bad things right on its heels. The lack of a real timeline makes the story weave around with no structure or proper flow. The characters for the most part do nothing, and the story is just utter nonsense. The single major accomplishment is that we made it to Mistral, and even that victory feels hollow in the face of the bullshit we've seen. This is a setup volume that leaves things hazy at best as to what they were actually setting up. And believe me when I tell you, you can have a setup volume that actually has shit happen. If you want to just skip this volume, well, I wouldn't particularly blame you. You'd be confused on things, but to be fair, you were probably already confused by things anyway with how little this show explains or how contradictory the explanations are. Oh my god. I'm finally free. Finally, I don't have to talk about RWBY anymore. Oh fuck, there's gonna be a volume 5. Damn it. Alright, well, that's it for me, that's it for now. Thank you for watching, hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh, fuck.